Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We're looking at the language of Matthew chapter 24, 29, and following. In that context, the context of the abomination of desolation, the Great Tribulation, both of which were Judea-centric, and to be seen and witnessed by first century generation believers and individuals. It is in that context that Jesus said, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, the stars of heaven shall be shaken, the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then he said, then all the tribes of the earth shall mourn. Now, as I've shared with you, this is a direct quote from Zechariah chapter 12. Notice in Zechariah 12, verse 10, and I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look upon me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieves for him as one grieves for a firstborn. You know, I don't know of many scholars, I don't really know of any scholars that deny that Jesus in Matthew 24:30 was drawing directly from Zechariah chapter 12. Well, what I've shared with you for the last 2 days is that the context of Zechariah 12, 13, and 14 are unequivocally the AD 70 judgment of Jerusalem. Point number one, this is clearly about a judgment on Jerusalem and Judea. The land shall mourn, every family by itself, the family of the house of David by itself, their wives, etc., etc., etc. This is about Judea and Jerusalem, looking on him whom they had pierced and mourning. And, as we saw, paradoxically, it's not only the time of mourning, but according to chapter 13, and in that day, boy, that's such a critical, key term in the entirety, actually the entirety of Zechariah, but beginning in chapter 8 especially, all the way through the end of the book, that term is used over and over again. And let me urge you again, go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, and in the search tab, just do a search. Zechariah, in that day, or in that day, Zechariah, something like that. I wrote an entire series of articles on the significance of that term, in that day, in the book of Zechariah. Here's the key. Here's the critical element about that term. Not one referent to in that day can be removed from the first century. Not one. From the reference to the being betrayed in the house of the enemy, to striking the shepherd and the sheep scattering, which is quoted by Jesus himself in Matthew 26:31, and applied to what was happening right then and right there in his betrayal, his passion. The entire body of those references to in that day referred to the first century. Now, notice that chapter 13, in that day a fountain for cleansing would be opened in the house of David, and a spirit of supplication. In that day, the false prophet and the false spirits. It says spirit, singular, but here's the deal. This is what's known as heterosis. Just because it uses the word spirit doesn't mean it's not talking about evil spirits, plural. It's not just one evil spirit that would pass out of the land. It is, heterosis is a term, according to Bullinger and other experts on the imagery and the language of the Bible. Heterosis is when a singular word is used to refer to plural, or for that matter, when a plural form of a word is used to refer to a singular. It's a common form of speech in the Old Testament. And so this is, verse 2 is just another way of saying, I will cut off the names of the idols from the land. They shall no longer be remembered. I will cause the prophets and the unclean spirit. It's not just one unclean spirit. It's the unclean spirits to depart from the land. So this is all in that day. In that day, that every prophet will be ashamed of his vision when he prophesies. And then we come, for time consideration, behold, the day of the Lord is coming. When would this be? In the day when 2/3 of the people would be cut off out of the land and only a remnant would remain, a remnant that would be purified. When was the remnant being saved? Oh, that was in the first century, wasn't it? When was the remnant being purified? Oh, that was in the first century, wasn't it? According to Peter, in 1 Peter chapter 1, 5 and following, the trying of your faith being much more precious than gold or silver that is tried with fire. Yeah, that's the refining that was going on. In that day, behold, the day of the Lord is coming. Your spoil will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all of the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished. Half the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Folks, this is the time of the siege and the destruction of Jerusalem. Can there be any serious doubt about this? The time when the women would be ravished, half the city would go off. Then when? The day of the Lord. The Lord will go forth and fight against those nations that he fights in the day of battle. And in that day, the Lord's feet, his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be split in two. Now, I have people tell me, well, Jesus never stood on the Mount of Olives at the time of the fall of Jerusalem. Well, the physical eye didn't see it. But that's certainly the context. And we cannot forget the spiritual eyes that might very well have seen and witnessed, just like in 1 Kings. You know, Elijah says, Lord, open the eyes of his servant, Gehazi, so that he may see. And the Lord opened his eyes, and he saw the armies of the Lord up on the mountains. It may be in play here. But the point of fact is, what do we have? In that day, all of this would happen. So, notice now, the Lord your God will come, and all the saints with him, and it shall come to pass in that day that there shall be no light, the lights will diminish. It shall be one day which is known to the Lord. Oh, wait a minute. In Matthew 24:36, in speaking of his coming, in speaking of the fall of Jerusalem, Jesus said, but of that day and hour knows no man but the Father only. And now here, in the prediction of the fall of Jerusalem, it shall be one day known only to the Lord. Neither day nor light, but at evening time it shall happen that it will be light. In other words, it will be revealed. Not known, but revealed. Just like the New Testament writers did not know prior to the receiving of the Holy Spirit, the time of the parousia, but the Spirit was given to them to know that the day of the Lord had drawn near. The point being, in Matthew chapter 24 and verse 30, Jesus directly cites Zechariah chapter 12 verse 10 in his prediction of the judgment of Jerusalem, in his prediction of his coming at the time of the abomination and the tribulation that were Judea-centric, Judea-focused, first century focused. He cited Zechariah, but Zechariah likewise was a prediction of the time in which those who had pierced the Lord, crucified him, they would mourn. And it is specifically identified as the time in which 2/3 of the people would be cut off, the time of the remnant's salvation, the day of the Lord, just like in Matthew chapter 24. Folks, we got perfect harmony here. Absolute perfect harmony. And oh, by the way, we have perfect harmony between Zechariah and the book of Revelation as well. Need to get a copy of my book, Who Is This Babylon, to see that development. Well, I'm out of time for today. Hey, don't forget that in the morning we will continue our response and refutation to Lance Conley's book, Hope Resurrected. We will be examining Mr. Conley's view of the election, which he claims is the death knell, the dagger through the heart of full preterism. I beg to differ. And we'll see that on the flip side.